So I've seen a good amount of footage and coverage recently, at least on my social media feed, particularly on Twitter, about kind of the protest movement that's happening in Belarus right now. And I think we would be wise to maybe hold back, support for any type of regime change operation there right now, especially when you have the likes of people like Joe Biden in particular, and the organizations like USAID and NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, more or less just fronts for the CIA supporting this. So it's a kind of an interesting article here by Roger Harris on Mint Press. I'll link it down below about what's happening in Belarus. So title is The Tribulations of Triangulation. Few options for Belarus amid a color revolution. And I had heard of the term color revolution before, and I didn't exactly know what it was or Google it before, but is a media term for a movement based on legitimate grievances only to be co-opted into a regime change operation backed by the U.S. and Confederates, which seems to be happening in Belarus right now. There have been so many: Georgia 2003, Ukraine in 2004, Kyrgyzstan in 2005, that they've run out of colors. Belarus is amidst the slipper color revolution. So again, color revolution, there's, legitimate grievances going on, and that movement's being co-opted by the U.S. and, its allies. So Belarus, it's the last Soviet republic. Former constituent republic of the USSR declared its sovereignty in 1990 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union under its new and now contested president Alexander Lukashenko, first elected in 1994. Belarus rejected the Western-imposed economic shock therapy, which is a good thing, obviously, that looted the public wealth of many of the other former Soviet republics by basically selling off what were these, publicly run institutions for the betterment of the people. They were sold off and privatized, leading to shock therapy. Earning the sobriquet, not sure what that means, last Soviet Republic, Belarus retained state-run industry and agriculture, the social safety net, and relative equality of the socialist period. All good things, right? Along with that came ending Cold War enmity of the U.S. and its NATO epigenes. In contrast, the newly liberated Russian Federation, with its U.S.-installed leader Boris Yeltsin and its cabal of Nauvoo-rich oligarchs, was plundered by Western capital. Note, the Slavs have oligarchs while the U.S. has philanthropists like Turner, Gates, and Soros. Its standard of living, social services, life expectancy went into free fall. That's in Russia. Initially, Belarus was more prosperous than Russia, but as the Belarusian economy slowed in the early 2000s, the Russian economy surged with the ascendance of Vladimir Putin. The sprawling U.S. embassy in Belarus occupies an area the size of a city block. Clearly, the Yanks do more than just issue visas. The U.S. is preoccupied with regime change, as they always are with, again, any country, no matter where it is in the world, if they have any type of inkling of socialism, no matter how mild. In 2004, the U.S. passed the Belarus Democracy Act, overtly funding anti-government NGOs in Belarus and prohibiting loans. Tribulations of triangulation. The official language of Belarus are Belarusian and Russian. Some 80% of the population is ethnic Belarusian, followed by Russian. In 2000, Belarus and Russia established the Union State, a supranational confederation for economic integration and common defense. Though the two sovereigns declared the goal of a single entity, efforts at implementation have variously been stalled by Lukashenko. Russia sells oil and natural gas to Belarus at discounted rates. Belarus permits Russia to have a missile defense system on its territory, which is considered a critical deterrent against a NATO nuclear first strike. Again, it's, this relationship that Belarus has with Russia is kind of mutually beneficial to both states. Following the U.S.-backed coup in neighboring Ukraine in 2014, Lukashenko took a more independent nationalist tack, reflecting the predicament of Belarus as a buffer between Russia and increasingly aggressive NATO, which, again, just NATO in general is there to antagonize Russia. They more or less encircle Russia with bases, and Belarus is kind of caught in between, trying to have these partnerships, these mutually beneficial relationships with Russia, while still also balancing kind of their other roles with, NATO becoming increasingly aggressive, the U.S. always trying to overthrow any type of socialist government. Lukashenko has tried to triangulate between Russia and the West. Muammar Gaddafi chose a similarly conciliatory path, which ended badly for him and his country, which, Libya was invaded. Gaddafi was killed. They now have open-air slave markets there, when before Libya was, I believe, the most prosperous country economically in Africa. Internationally, Belarus has sided mainly with Russia, in addition to upholding the Palestinian rights. That's awesome. Warm relations with Venezuela. That's awesome. Trade with Syria, super important for Syria right now. From Washington's perspective, these have been fatal moves for Lukashenko, because it goes against the U.S. interest. They want regime change in Venezuela. They want it in Syria, and they don't give a shit about how the Israeli government and its apartheid state and how they treat the Palestinians. But the primary motive for U.S. foreign policy, with Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia joining NATO in 2004 and post-coup Ukraine likely on the way, is to complete the military occupation of Russia's western borders. Hence, Europe's last dictator must go. Playing both carrot and stick, U.S. Again, anytime U.S. State Department, particularly Mike Pompeo, wants any type of regime change or supports any type of protest movement, you'd be wary to jump wholeheartedly in support of that, because again, Pompeo is just a horrible record and is willing to do or say anything in order to prop up the interest of of U.S. empire. Visited Belarus last February to conclude an oil deal to wean Belarus from dependence on Russian-sourced petrol. Then in April, the U.S. and Belarus reestablished diplomatic relations. NED, as I talked about earlier, the quasi-government U.S. agency, which does legally what the CIA does extra-legally, currently lists projects in Belarus euphemistically described as developing civil society, fostering freedom of the media, fostering youth activism. They sound so good that one might wish for the NED to import some of these pro-democracy measures back to the homeland, right? Legitimate protests morph into a reactionary direction. Credible reports circulated suppression of the opposition. Lukashenko won with less than credible 80% of the vote. Still, most of the observers not aligned with the regime change per project believed he carried a majority. Runner-up candidate received 10% of the vote. She absconded to Lithuania. West now has their puppet in exile. This is one of the protesters there. Mass protests, including a showing of industrial workers, erupted, calling not only for free and fair elections, which is always, a euphemism in the West for regime change, installing any type of, leader, let's say in Venezuela, for example, Juan Guaido, who would do the bidding of the U.S. A national protest strike centered in Minsk is in the making. Angry young people wave the red and white flag that was flown during the Nazi occupation as the opposition protest morphs into a force aligned with the West. Never a good thing, because again, they want access to all of those socialized services in Belarus. They want to sell them off to the highest bidder. Pain and suffering to the Belarusian people when it outcome. Call for democracy raises the question of democracy for whom and under what kind of system. A coalition of opposition groups published a program of the Belarusian opposition. Among the sponsors of the program is the USAID, the cover agency for the CIA. A nearly identical document had been promulgated in 2014 after the Ukrainian coup. The published opposition program calls for a complete reorientation of the Belarusian state and society from east to west and the establishment of neoliberal political economy, which again, privatization, slashing all these public services, selling them off to the highest bidder, structural reorganizing, so it's for profit, inequality will increase, suffering will increase. We've seen this playbook over and over and over again. Privatization of state enterprises and the creation of a thorough market economy. Purchases of Belarusian enterprises by Russia will be prohibited while open to Western corporate interests. There you go. Russian media, along with scientific and cultural exchanges, would be suppressed. The official use of the Russian language would be banned in a nation where 70% speak Russian at home. Even the Belarusian Orthodox Church would replace the Belarusian ex-carte of the Russian Orthodox Church. Embers of reactionary nationalism would be famed. By just about all accounts, Lukashenko's 26-year rule of Belarus degenerated with questionable elections, authoritarian practices, mismanagement, and corruption. Even if Lukashenko won the last election, he has lost much of his credibility with his people, certainly with the West, even with his Russian ally. Let's see. And then Russia and China recognize Lukashenko's election. They have not vigorously supported him in public. Looks like you have some police beating a protester there. Again, that shit happens all the time in the U.S. You don't hear these other governments calling for the overthrow of the U.S., do you? Let's see. Domestically, the intelligentsia are alienated, workers discontented, and even as security services now show signs of disloyalty. Lukashenko may try to save his skin in the quasi-socialist state he founded by a phased leadership transition. A small fish in a superpower sea. Belarus needs to have the freedom to resolve the crisis without outside interference, exactly, but we see the USAID, NED, etc. there, U.S. State Department, totally in support of this. Based on the examples of Ukraine, etc., Armin Fischer, a German observer, warns that a color revolution in Belarus could bring the liquidation of state enterprises, mass layoffs, collapse of collective farms, mass exodus from the countryside, and the death of villages, disintegration of the social infrastructure, daycare centers, hospitals, old people's homes, and the consequence for life expectancy, alcoholism, and say drug use as well, and neglect. In return, you will certainly get new oligarchs. Free elections, Fisher admonishes, would bring freedom to the migrant workers competing for low-paying, undesirable jobs in Western Europe. I mean, Belarus under Lukashenko has its faults, and this is the important part, as well as the non-intervention. Let them figure their stuff out, right? Even so, a neoliberal coup would be worse for the people. The economic collapse of post-Ukraine, now the poorest country in Europe, serves as a cautionary example. Those who condemn the excesses of the present government need also consider the greater bloodbaths that followed riotous pushes in other former Soviet republics. Belarus shows that any small state with a mildly socialist system and independent foreign policy invites subversion by the Yankee hegemon and its collaborators. Even if Belarus had met the high standards of democracy and efficiency, a Western-backed color revolution might not have been avoided. And look at this. This is from Bloomberg. Share of population living in poverty. Most recent World Bank estimates. The Nordic countries in Europe. Belarus, 0.08%. And frankly, I think that's probably much higher in the U.S., especially right now. But look at that. They literally have a lower percentage of their population living in poverty than the United States. And again, the United States is the richest country in the world. This is defined as $5.50 a day or less. Tiny Belarus, population I believe under 10 million, less people living in poverty than in the United States, even less than Russia, Poland, the EU. Where's Ukraine on there? It'd be interesting. Look at Ukraine. They had their color revolution. 6.4%. Belarus, 0.08. So again, let Belarus figure out what they need to do. CIA and their front organizations, NED, USAID, State Department, these other Western imperial interests, again, just want to capitalize on this, turn some of these legitimate grievances into their color revolution and co-opt it so they can open up the market economy to neoliberalize all of these state-run resources for the benefit, of these multinational corporations. It's disgusting and it needs to be called out. Peace.